Interesting. UCC background.
All right, we're gonna get started. Thanks everyone for attending this event, our social transformation lunch. We have some special guests with us today. And I wanted to introduce you, if that's okay before we begin. We have the Reverend Mark Koyama. Mark grew up in Southeast Asia and New Zealand before moving to the US in 1980. He was educated at Bates College, Union Theological Seminary in New York City, University of Massachusetts, Amherst and Yale Divinity School. Mark now teaches literature and religious studies at Northfield Mount Herman School and is the settled pastor at the United Church of Jaffrey in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. And we have Kathy Blair with us. Kathy is a lifelong resident of Keene, New Hampshire, was a preschool occupational therapist for the Keene School District for 34 years, is very active in the United Church of Christ in Keene. She chaired the NHC UCC Koyama Mission Group in partnership with UCC churches in Zimbabwe and coordinated the renovation of UCC Elsie Priest Park and Children's Playground. Kathy, who learned to sew in 4-H, created quilt number 4. And finally, in memory of Dr. Harriet Ward, who passed away a few months ago and who had been involved in the preparation of this event and for the quilts to come to United. I wanted to read her bio as well. Dr. Harriet Ward, a scientist and Christian activist. Harriet served infants and young children who experienced vision loss, blindness, and other health challenges. She was also a powerful voice in the UCC and served on the National UCC Board of Directors and as chair of the Anti-Racism Ministry Group with the New Hampshire UCC Conference. The talent for quilting came naturally to Harriet. She grew up making meals, clothing, rag rugs, and quilts from scraps and leftovers. So we think of Harriet and wish that she was here, and I think that she might be here in spirit. Certainly through her quilt, her presence is felt. So thank you so much for coming to our social transformation lunch. And so this is the next day after our event last night, where we had a group here at the seminary who went through and reviewed the quilts, and then we had a nice conversation last night. And today we're going to have another conversation, perhaps a bit more informal, perhaps following up with questions from last night and additional questions that people have.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes.
Should go this seat so they can see you, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no one on there yet, but
Okay.
it will be recorded if that's okay with you.
All right. Yeah. So it is, of course, a great pleasure to be here. I think that we've taken the quilts to many venues since they first came together in September of 2020. The quilts were really very much a product of that COVID summer. In many ways, they were both the opportunity to have the time to set aside to make the quilts was in some ways part of, largely as a result of the pandemic, but also it also created this situation in which it was very difficult to create community and shared purpose around the project as well, because of the kind of forced separation. But we did bring them together. We blessed them in September of 2020 on the top of a mountain, this Cathedral of the Pines, which is kind of a semi mountaintop kind of venue in New Hampshire, beautiful place.
That overlooks Mount Monadnock.
Overlooks Mount Monadnock, but you know, of course, we had to do it outside, and if those of you who have seen the documentary have seen that you know that the blessing of the quilts took place essentially in a parking lot. But we brought them together, and I think all of you perhaps know what the quilts are and what they represent, what's on them. Each of the quilts, we had an original collection of 10 quilts. Each of the quilts was made by a different congregation in New Hampshire, a different UCC congregation in New Hampshire. And together, when the quilts were all brought together for the first time at the blessing, we saw them together. They all immortalized essentially the final words that George Floyd said when he was done. So we had that blessing in September. It was really quite an extraordinary moment. And I had worked quite closely with Harriet during the process of getting the quilts together. But it was perhaps, I think it was the second time I met her when we were on the Mount blessing quilts. But shortly thereafter, we were having long conversations about the quilts, and she said to me, "This is not a project. This is not a project. This is a ministry." And it was a very important moment, because it was the moment when, you know, I as not a quilter, you know, I kind of call myself a quilt doula, you know, like I'm not a quilter. So when I had this idea, you know, I thought it was an amazing idea and a really interesting idea, and an idea that could catch. But it was really, for me, it was almost like an arts and crafts project a little bit, you know, like I wasn't fully aware of the significance of what we were doing until we got them together, and until this moment when Harriet said, "Look, you know, we've got something here that's extraordinary, and we can't just roll them up and put them away. They have to have a life, you know." And you may remember in the documentary there was the litany where we were talking about give them breath, you know. And she was like, if you roll them up and put them away, they're not going to be breathing. They're not going to be alive. They're just going to be, you know, stored away. We really need them to be out there. So it was very important when ontologically, when they shifted from being, you know, a project to being a ministry, right? The nature of their being shifted in this moment. So I'm just kind of going on here, but I'd be happy to.
Yeah, well, can I just say that we started by displaying them at most of the churches that had participated in creating one of the quilts. And then they started being requested. They went to some private high schools, St. Paul's School, Vermont Academy. They've been to Southern Connecticut University. And they did a whole tour of the Southern New England Conference last May and June. They toured 6 or so different sites, ending up at the library. What is it called?
Congregational Library.
Archives in Boston. And they, a year ago in February, they did a tour of Ohio. and ended up at the, in Cleveland where the, national board met, and the, conference ministers annual meeting, had a lovely service there. And, then this summer, they went to Indianapolis to Synod, and then from there, on to the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. So they've really traveled, and but Minnesota's the furthest distance they've traveled so far.
Yeah, we're delighted that they're here. Yeah,
Yeah.
really,
Yes.
absolutely delighted.
You mentioned, Mark, that you dispatched one of them with a tribal elder. Tell about that.
That's right, yeah. So, Kathy can fill us in a little bit more, on that. So essentially, the Anti-Racism Ministries Group, which is the conference-wide anti-racism group in New Hampshire. We started a speaker series. Which we hope to do annually every year. And the first speaker in our speaker series was Mark Charles, who was a indigenous activist and quite a remarkable speaker. And in honor of his coming to speak, Harriet and Kathy put together quilt number 12. And quilt number 12 was essentially the way that Harriet likes to describe it. She says, she uses Mark Charles's words. She says, this is what America would look like if Columbus had not gotten lost at sea. You know, so this was, you know, she was borrowing Mark Charles's words to say that, to describe it. So essentially what this quilt was, excuse me, it's a watercolor that it moves in a kind of gradient from the water up and then
Animal, birds, with, mountains and a sunset.
yeah.
And, then when asked the favorite square, I think it was both Mark Charles and Louis Bluecoat who pointed to the buffalo and applicate on to a
It's
grassland.
So we made this quilt in honor of Mark Charles's the Mark Charles event, and we debuted it at his event. And we asked him if he would be so kind as to name the quilt. So he said, let me think about it a little bit and get back to you. So he thought about it for a while and he got back to us and he called it Osho,
Yeah,
which do you deal with the,
beauty, harmony, and one other word,
yeah.
yes.
And then so we had this quilt, which was quilt 12 in our collection, and it moved around with us for a while. And then Louis Bluecoat, who is a
Lakota leader.
yeah, and also very big in the UCC on the reservation. He came and spoke. He came to a retreat, to our anti-racism ministries group retreat, and he drove all the way from South Dakota, and so we blessed the quilt number 12, and we gave it to him. And we said, you know, take this quilt to your communities. So we need to find out what happened with that quilt. But that's the story behind it as well.
I'll see him this summer, so I'll ask.
Thank you, okay. Fantastic.
Are there other questions?
Yeah.
Don't be bashful.
No, I'm curious, Mark and Kathy, how you and all your congregations were geographically so far from us. Were able to allocate and make it this beautiful ministry. No, we can't have- I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised at all had it happened here. Maybe Madison, I mean, around us. Tell us about that. I think it's remarkable.
Well, as you know, with media as it is, we all watched that horrifying video. Probably we would have liked or portions of it, and we were all deeply hurt, I think. I mean, I would hope that that was a national hurt, even global, yeah. And so when Mark told the story, I think last night, of how you had an idea, ran it by the New Hampshire Conference, the anti-racism group, and sent out an email, and I received that email from my pastor, who just said, this has your name written all over it. I had done coordinated quilts for Habitat builds in our region. We're a Habitat partner church. And so at each blessing of a home, we would present a beautiful quilt to the family. And so she knew that, you know, this was something that I like to do. Of course, I had been sewing hundreds of face masks and nurse hat skull or coverings during COVID, because I have family members who are medical people. And once they started showing up with it, all their friends were like, can I have one of those?
Sure.
So this came across, and I immediately, I think, applied to Mark that I would like to be involved, and I could make a quilt, or I could help other people make one, or whatever was, you know, needed. And so reading, it's a beautiful email. I mean, that the composition of that initial letter, and with the words of George Floyd, and sort of how you laid out a possible process or project or whatever, is just, you know, really so beautifully written, and that just completely called to my heart. And as you said, you know, it was that summer, a very isolating summer, basically. I mean, you didn't go very far from home, and you didn't see many other people, and so for me, it was a wonderful time to be intentional about this, you know, sewing. And I actually chose one of the quilts that had a lot of lettering. I immediately said, you know what, one thing I'd love to do is involve the youth in our church in doing the cutting out of the lettering, so they would have an intent within this.
Yeah.
And so I was able to do that. I actually got a little pushback from a couple parents who, I guess they thought it had been run through the pastor and the youth lead director, but they somehow thought the email shouldn't have come directly from me anyway. But anyway, it was a wonderful project, and it caused me to do a lot of reading while I was quilting, and trying to learn more about the racial injustices, the history. I read so many of the books that are out there, white fragility and caste and so forth. But it wasn't until I met Harriet and established what became a very authentic, loving relationship that I think I really understood or was able to, I don't know, put together what I had read, what I had felt with make more meaning of it.
Did you get, what kind of responses did you get from other congregations? I mean, obviously beautiful finished pieces, but
Right.
were people on board?
Well, yeah, so it's a bit of a long and a little bit fraught story. I can't remember how many congregations there are in New Hampshire. It's like over 150, something like that. Of which 9 churches responded. So And Kathy thankfully was the first one. I put it out there and, I was waiting, with bated breath and then
Yeah.
thankfully Kathy somewhat quickly responded. So I was like, oh, well, at least it's an idea that's catching on a little bit, let's see what happens. And then eventually over time, 8 other churches responded. And so then we gathered this Zoom call together in order to kind of strategize how things were, how things would go. But, from the very beginning, and this was very true with my church, was my church, I think, had been, they had been a little bit hesitant to get off the sidelines with BLM, with Black Lives Matter and stuff like that, and this really pushed them over the edge. George Floyd really pushed that sense of the necessity to do something. And initially, really what they wanted to do was they wanted to put a BLM sign up. That's what they wanted to do. Like, that was essentially the extent of it. It's like, that's as far as we're willing to stick our neck out, is to put a Black Lives Matter sign on the lawn. And in New Hampshire,
Yeah.
doing that
Yeah.
is, it is,
Firm.
yeah, and it is sticking your neck out.
Mhm.
But, but I knew at that moment that from the way that the chat group in my church was going, I knew that there was a demographic of people in New Hampshire, progressive Christian people in New Hampshire, that wanted to express some kind of allyship, but really didn't know how to do it. And I thought this might be a good way to do it.
Mhm.
So, and also just from my kind of memory of how the AIDS quilt had been so effective and such a powerful social movement, which had really recast the whole dialogue around AIDS in the 1980s. So I knew that, like, quilting was a powerful activism tool. And it was one that, that we would have all kinds of folks in the churches who who had these skills, right?
Mhm.
So, and I also really did intentionally want the rest of the world to know that New Hampshire wasn't just this monolith of white, kind of apathy,
Yeah.
that there was, at least some sensibility that wanted to have some action.
Mhm.
And the reason at the beginning, the reason I say it was fraud is because, as I was mentioning last night, there was a sense in which, while the quilts were being made, there was really this kind of sense of shared purpose insofar as we could create that in the Zoom call. But after it was done, most of the quilters, with the exception of Harriet and Kathy, most of them essentially evaporated. They didn't really follow up at all.
There was a sense of pride, I
Yes,
think,
yeah.
with each church as they displayed the quilts.
Yeah.
I mean, I was sort of the quilt Sherpa, he's a quilt doula, I was packing him up in my car and driving them to this town and driving them to that town, teaching them how to set up the quilts and so forth. And I sensed this level of excitement and pride in having participated in the project, each one of those churches. But yes, they're not continuing on with the ministry of, coordinating or spreading the news or scheduling or like writing thank you notes or whatever are all the tasks that need to be done.
Can I ask you a question about that? It seems to me that the quilts, part of their power is that it's a kind of invitation to reflection. I mean, the work of making the quilt takes this, you talked about the intentionality, the sort of focus that went into it, the prayer, the meditative quality of it, also like the, I'm struck by Harriet's words in the documentary, refusal to have it be an ephemeral outrage, right? So there's something about the intentionality and the meditative quality of that, and the quilt making itself. But that is juxtaposed with this, with the kind of inaction or the kind of dropping off of some of the participants. And I guess I'm wondering about like the invitational dimension too, for people that view the quilts. What is an invitation to do? What is the next step, and what does it look like to sort of sustain action for social justice, for racial justice? Because I see it as an invitation to a deeper commitment. And I'm wondering about, I guess that's related to my question about conversion.
Yes.
And like, I'm wondering how you're wrestling with that today. And if you have ideas for like, for next steps for churches or groups that view these quilts, like something that they can, how do they move forward beyond the invitation toward something deeper?
Yeah.
There's certainly an invitation for other churches or groups to create a quilt that might become a part of this ministry display, or it might be displayed in their own place of worship. But we know the powerful impact of working with fabric and being intentional about, colors and patterns and how you place letters on the fabric and what you are trying to relay. So that's certainly one of the invitations we are making when we're displaying the quilts.
Yeah. I think that, we've always kind of had this hope that, on analogy with the AIDS quilt, we've always kind of had this hope that, can you imagine, like if there's a church in every neighborhood in the United States, right? There's churches and racism is everywhere, and certainly racial violence has some of the same kind of cultural kind of fraught, problematic, obviously deeply rooted pain in our history, and which continues to affect our lives, and and so it has a similar kind of gravitas and pain associated with it that the AIDS epidemic had, and so you begin to start thinking big, right? I mean, there were 5,000 people who were lynched in this country during the lynching era. And each one of those individuals had a life that could be celebrated in some way. And, there are certainly, I think that there are 5,000 churches in the UCC, so, and then of course there was the feeding of the 5,000, right? So there's a lot of possibilities here, right? And it begins to boggle the mind, right? I mean, we've just done this one thing, and we've done so much with it, and we've kind of stumbled on this remarkable modality, which has all these opportunities for transformation, right? But there were 3 of us, now there's just 2 of us, and so it's hard to begin to think about what's really involved. The possibilities are extraordinary, but I am perhaps the most administratively challenged individual on the planet. So, I have a visionary, obviously I can come up with ideas, but, actually, getting somebody to do something is difficult for me. So
You're a new one for
maybe
administrator.
just get school and Stella to come and join us. But,
But I wonder about Harriet, like, how Harriet, what was she agitating for? What do you think she was agitating for?
She was really hot, but she was really hot on this idea of the number of people who were lynched, and how that that correlated with the number of UCC churches in the country, and so she really loved that idea. Another idea that we batted around a lot was this, was the idea of making quilts to honor the people who had been exonerated from death row by Brian Stevenson. That talk, to get involved with EJI to kind of to get that going. It was another idea that we had. Another thought was, making quilts to bring light to the incarceration, the life incarceration of juveniles who have life sentences. And things like that that we could really use this modality to really shed light and to create conversation. This thing that came up last night, which I think is so crucial here, is this idea that quilting is I call it it's a rhetorical sleight of hand, because you're getting people into the conversation with this symbol that is a symbol of comfort and love, and yet it's this what we're doing is we're using that symbol of comfort and love to challenge people and to set them off balance and to say, this is something that we need to confront. This is something that we need to be talking.
I'm glad to be here today, and we met in Synod, and
I know.
yeah, a meeting good one, yes. And I grew up in New Hampshire,
Okay.
so, and Synod, it was out actually in the hallway in this huge convention center.
Yeah.
And I was bustling between and just,
Sure.
seeing everybody. It was like what you said about the quilts also pulling in liturgically. I think I literally was, I just stopped.
Yeah.
And there's an incredible power with these quilts. And that's one of my passions and callings is quilting and justice right now. So it's incredibly moving. And having grown up in New Hampshire, imagining a church even considering Black Lives Matter, that's a miracle. That's great. And one of the challenges that we're talking about is how do you sustain it?
Exactly.
And after on the Zoom last night, reflecting about the seeds that were planted by my pastor in New Hampshire decades ago. And with these quilts, trusting those seeds that, the particular quilters may not be actively present, but some change has happened.
Yeah.
And I say that out loud about this project. That's one of the challenges for me as an artist and an activist, my personal opinion. So one of my questions you sort of answered too around just what other focus points you might be considering. And then I'm wondering if you're considering anything coming up with the anniversary in May as a way to, and the intentionality you talked about is so important to create that space. So I'm wondering if there's any considerations around the anniversary coming up for New Hampshire.
I don't know.
Harriet died in January.
Right.
And Harriet was obviously very dear to both of us. And her family kind of didn't step up, so she ended up with me at the end of her life. She was in my living room, and in a hospital bed in my living room, and it was a very intimate and amazing time. But it was also, it also, I think that we're a little bit kind of in the wake of that right now as a ministry. We're trying to kind of get our heads back up out of the water and trying to figure out like, well, okay, what's next? And I think a lot of the momentum, a lot of the visionary momentum that we had was largely came out of the conversations that Harriet and I had, the interminable conversations that we had about these things. And so I think we're really kind of regrouping, trying to figure out what is next. I think it would be great if we had like an institutional partner or something. You know, or something, but, because there's, you know, as you can see, there's extraordinary possibilities here. And it's, but it's also something that requires a lot of thought and a lot of logistical planning. We're deeply grateful that we're able to come out here and you know, and just the way that you guys did this, you know, you said, let's do it, and we did it, you know, and it's just, that's the way we need to proceed. And I'm really excited about the possibility of also being able to engage other UCC seminaries. I don't, you know, I hope that we can get some momentum. You know.
As we're talking, I'm realizing the first thing I wanted to acknowledge was the honors agreement.
What's that?
I wanted to honor the agreement
Yeah.
that's going on,
Yeah.
and so your hearts, and that's one of the great joys of being working in justice. There's the people that touch us
Yeah.
and inspire us to continue even when we're in this space. And one of the thoughts that just came, and connecting back to the names for the quilt, which I was a part of, one of the founding volunteers, is to create a quilt that honors heritage.
Yeah.
As part of, to continue this ministry and honor your hearts.
Yeah.
And I just-
Well, so one of the ideas that we have is that so we did this for Karen Georgia Thompson when she became the new general president and minister, general minister and president of the UCC. We had her place a square in the middle of a quilt, of a quilt backing. What do you call
Yeah,
it?
it's fusible interfacing and it has a grid on it, so you can place a square and, you know, follow the lines. And then we had all the other conference ministers and national board. This happened sort of at a break from their meeting last March. Choose a fabric that we had sort of spread around the various tables in the conference room. Choose one that spoke to them and come and place it somewhere on this grid surrounding the one that Karen Georgia.
So it was almost like a
placed in
laying
the
on of
center.
hands. kind of
Nice.
thing.
Nice.
You see the symbolism there?
Yeah.
So we have this notion that we're gonna put a piece of fabric in the bulletin at her memorial service.
Yes.
And so each person can come and put the square on her this in the same manner, and then that will, I think, will hopefully become her quilt.
We have, or as we were cleaning out her apartment, I found the box that has a lot of the purple squares.
Oh,
I opened it up and I said, this is quilt 9 here, the leftovers, so we'll use those. As well as other pieces.
I'm aware of the interfaith possibilities of this and wondering how we could, I'm thinking of organizations even in the Twin Cities that include Jews and Muslims and Baha'i and Buddhists, just to get this more out there beyond the UCC. Sponsored perhaps by the UCC, but out, much more out into the community, out of the AIDS culture. You know, this crosses all lines.
Yeah, it's true. We have a Unitarian church right outside of Boston who they're talking to me about the possibility of having a quilt. So that's our first kind of venture outside the UCC. And then we can, you know, and I think it's the the kind of ecumenical, kind of. Move, and then, potentially the multi-faith move, I think those are all within certainly within the realm of possibility. I wouldn't see any reason why not. And of course, then you enrich the whole symbolic vocabulary that you can use is vastly increased, right? So, and that's part of it, right? Is this so much of this is the resonance, the symbolic resonance, and how we can harness that to create this new vision, right? This new possibility.
I'm fascinated that this model can exist at the crossroads of local community building and then regional community building and then public conversation.
Yeah.
And it can also involve people who would never otherwise be involved in other forms of activism, like people who are very, very young and people who are of advanced age, will never be able to pick up a sign and protest on the street, but they'll be able to create beautiful works of art. And I'm looking at this like, wow, this has immense potential. And what you were talking about, the interfaith possibilities. I'm just curious, like what you've thought through as far as the potential people that can be involved in this, because it seems pretty expansive. And one more thing that I want to add to this is that I've read studies that show that activism and movement really works when it can involve more people. And this seems to be able to draw in people who, other methods just don't. So,
yeah, I mean, that's part of the beauty of it too, is that we recognize quite early is that this medium bridges difference just in every way, right? Generational difference, racial difference, ethnic difference, like every ethnic, heritage that you can imagine has a quilting tradition, right? And when everywhere we go, literally, that there's that moment which is the same moment that happened in the film last night with Helen, when Helen said, well, I came from a long line of quilters, right? Literally, every time we go anywhere, somebody says, oh, I come from a long line of quilters. That's like, so it's embedded in our tradition. And so when you harness that, you're not only harnessing the aesthetic and the artistic talents of an individual, you're harnessing a generations of memory.
Yep.
And then you begin to think about the quilt that we have here, that is the quilt that was made by this enslaved, the great grandmother of Harriet, who was still enslaved when she made that quilt. And there's this massive, immense and incredible tradition of African American quilting, right? Like G's Bend and all these just unbelievably beautiful tradition of quilting. So yes, that's precisely, and what you just said just now was so wonderful. What you said about how it engages people that you don't necessarily normally consider to be activists in that way. Like, I think one of the things that kind of impoverishes us as activists is that there's really only one vision for activism, which is running out on the street and yelling. And does that really, like, I mean, it's important, but there are other ways to do it, right? Then and the old ladies in the church, they never underestimate old lady power. Yeah. Little old lady power, right? So, that's why I say LOL. My version of LOL is little old lady power. And You know, I bet, I bet, now, and I don't know about this, but I bet if Derek Chauvin's grandmother had walked up to him at that moment and said, get your knee off that, I'll bet he would have, he would have listened to her. But, and you know, you could get the biggest man in uniform to come up to him and say that, and he wouldn't do it, but I'll bet if his grandmother had said it to him, he would have taken this, you know. There's, you know, that, you know, I'm not sure, but I'll bet, I'm willing to bet that. And so there's great power there. That needs to be harnessed.
Part of the invitation too, at workshops that are facilitated, there are people who have never, ever touched thread or fabric. And I always remember one of the first workshops, there were some kids, some teenagers, and they literally were like this. It's like, okay, start talking. And part of from that workshop, and you mentioned it last night too, that the process of quilting is so stronger to the current culture of ready-made plastic and quilt.
Yep.
And so no matter what the focus of the creating is, you can go to that place of mind, touching something, creating something individually and as a part of a community that is so profound. And yeah. So, and then there are people who, you know, grew up sewing, like my generation, especially in New England, not having much money, we grew up sewing our clothes, and then that happened in their own lives and culturally. So people haven't sewn for a long time that return to sewing, and people who used to sew a lot and find limitations now physically that find a way to participate. So there's all sorts of limitations that just.
There's the story of the wasn't there a children's book about African American quilting where there's where what they would do is they would have the quilts laid out and the mothers or the grandmothers would put the needle through.
Yes.
And then there'd be a child underneath.
Yep.
The needle got through, you know, under the table, and then, you know, that was how they did it. And it's just, you know, you think about things like that, and it's, you know, that in and of itself has profound liturgical, you know, implications. Talking about like the work of the people, right? Like the you know, the intentions and the shared purpose, right? All of those things are things that we value and worship.
Do you remember a few years ago when the call went out across the United Church of Christ for a scarf in memory of marathoners who were
Oh, yeah.
and it came from across the nation. Well, there is that kind of power in not only fabric, but yarn and people who use it.
Yes. I wish you know, I think we have something amazing. It's just a matter of having the people power to get it done. And you know, like I said, I'm the big picture guy. I'm the visionary, and I think that we did some amazing things.
Yeah, you did.
And there's still amazing stuff to be done, but it's the possibilities are extraordinary. But it's fitting it in with all the other jobs that I do.
No, right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And your congregations.
I wonder if we could say anything more about the inefficiency. I was struck last night, we were talking about that because I'm not sure if everyone knows, but Mark's dad was a very important theologian. And he spoke of, he wrote about the 3 mile an hour God. And the inefficient God, the slow God. I wonder if you have any reflections on how this project with the quilting relates to that,
Yeah,
the slowness of that is that,
I think of it, you know how we have these devices, right, where we can speak and the words show up like,
Yeah.
And then, prior to that, we had these computers where we could type and it would go fast, it would go quickly. And then prior to that, we had these slower computers that were as slower, were a little bit slower. And then, my father wrote all of his books on these manual typewriters, sort of like clunk, 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 clunk,
Right.
clunk, clunk, right? And then you have like you going back to the cuneiform, where
Yeah.
you're like, where you're like scraping into a stone, right? And so we're getting, the farther back we go, the slower we are in this process of writing text, of creating text. And so the whole trajectory of this technology is moving us towards getting it done as quickly as possible. And what we're doing is we're saying, oh no, we're all the way back to the like even slower than the cuneiform probably, like this, it takes you literally, an afternoon to cut a word out. And then it takes, a long time then to applicate it to.
Lay it on and stitch around the
So
letters.
these last words, which you could sit down and you could write like this on a computer in 3 minutes, probably, took us the entire summer. Took us the entire summer, and that was fast, right? It was fast, that was breakneck speed, right? Like
Very fast to get a
like,
quilt done in 3 months.
usually.
Yes.
So, in that sense, right, it's deeply subversive to the whole trajectory of our technology. And now we have AI, right? Of course, which removes us entirely from the equation, right?
Yeah.
Or the possibility of chips in your brain
Yeah,
to speak.
yeah.
I think that tends to
I mean,
to work directly from your brain into a computer.
And we went to a restaurant just the other night, and instead of making an order with the human voice and speaking to our human and saying, oh, can I have this and that and the other thing, we have to press these buttons and do all these menus in order to just order some food, right? And so yes, so this is very subversive, and and with the slowing down comes the intentionality, right? And I think that's probably, that's at the heart somewhat of my father's conversation around 3 mile an hour God, right? Because 3 mile an hour is how fast a human walks, right? So the idea is that God walks at 3 miles an hour because God is accompanying us. So if we're walking 3 miles an hour, then God's gonna walk 3 miles an hour. God's not gonna get in a sports car, because you can't accompany somebody when you're in a sports car, right? So, and this is classic Coast Guard, right? So if God is accompanying you, then God's going 3 miles an hour. And the same thing is true here with these quilts, right? Is that if you want to create a spiritual practice around words, you can't do it using AI. You can't do it using these efficient methodologies. It has to take time.
yeah, what does that say about, how does that connect to fighting against racism? Do you think?
Well,
The
so
work of anti-racism is
well,
not something that happens overnight.
right. It's not, yes, exactly. It's one of the things that we've done in the anti-racism ministries group in New Hampshire is that we used to have this process where churches could follow these certain curriculum and then become an anti-racism church, right? And we discovered that like, once these churches became anti-racism churches, then they were like, look at us, we're anti-racism churches. And like, they kind of felt like, oh, our work is done, you know, we're good,
Yeah.
we're good, we're done.
Take that one off.
Yeah, you know, and,
Yeah.
and we realized that we really had to, shift that away from that model. We had to say, you're not gonna become an anti-racism church. You're gonna become a church that is working towards you are a church that is becoming an anti-racist, right? It's a quality of being that's not just over, it's something that
Yeah.
is ongoing. And the same thing is true here, right? Is that this, you know, we're talking about process rather than fun. We're not talking about what is the word? When you get a badge on your
Certificate.
yeah, exactly.
American.
Credential, right? It's not about a credential. It's about a process. And that actually was a real danger of the quilts, because the people who did the quilts, they really could kind of say, well, look at us, we did quilts.
So
And
we're not racist.
exactly, right,
I thought about that when you said they have faded away.
right.
Yeah. 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 And that's one of the tensions, for example, after George Floyd was murdered, within 2 or 3 weeks, they can tell you the number of folks, you know, the other cast. I'm sure you explain it. You know, and so as there's that tension of
Right,
action is action, learning is essential.
right.
And at some point, as white people, we need to put books down.
Yeah, that's what
And jump off the page, whether it's the books or certificates or something, whatever. And I love the UCC, was raised in the UCC, but we are kind of resolution and proclamation and blah, 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 church over the
Right.
top sometimes. And it's like, what does it all mean?
Right,
They have it on the paper. And again, that process of curriculum in terms of our paper, I'm dating myself, paper, authority. And
Hey, what's that?
LOL, I like I have a new name. Anyway,
don't forget the power.
yeah, LLP. Anyway, and part of art making challenges that. And so how, like creating art-based curriculum slows it down and in that sense of invitation. And it was amazing conversations one-on-one in that summer. But I still remember going, inherently at some point as white people, we need to put the books down. And, you know, we know enough to say in whatever way, this needs to stop. And this is how to be engaged in that, and the learning that, oh, there's lots more breathing room than there used to be. Anyway, lots more breathing room of the how. And that would be really interesting. I'm really curious of how, and in terms of these specific cultures and congregations, like what was it nearly 40 years ago? And they say yes.
Yeah.
And how can that sort of spark be rekindled? Whether it's how directly related to this quilt project, or how spark to whatever showing up for justice.
Yeah.
And that's again one of the challenges. And in the class, I brought up in the class one time the curiosity, and it was so resonated so true. He said, in his experience watching people, the more disciplined in terms of spiritual practices someone are, the least activists they are. The more activist people are, the less in terms of our spiritual, just for practice, they seem to be, so that, again, is an invitation that this quote brings us to stop separating those. And, yeah,
Thanks so much, Marcy and Kathy. Wonderful. And in memory of Harriet Ward, thanks everybody for attending today.
And join us on Saturday, we're doing some quilting.
That's right. Join us on Saturday, 1 o'clock here at the seminary.
Right here.
Right here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.